The day I found out I was pregnant, a whirlwind of pure, unadulterated joy mixed with a subtle, creeping fear washed over me. My career, meticulously built over years of relentless dedication, was finally on a promising trajectory. But then, when I walked into my boss's office, my heart fluttering with the intention of sharing my happy news, I was wholly unprepared for what came next. My boss, Greg Thompson, the man I had worked tirelessly to impress the man whose approval I had sought, informed me in no uncertain terms that my burgeoning motherhood was incompatible with my burgeoning career. "You can't keep this job, Martha, if you're going to be a mother," he'd stated, his voice devoid of warmth, his eyes cold and dismissive. I was devastated, shattered. I had poured years of my life, my energy, my very soul into this company, into this role, and now my pregnancy was being treated not as a joyous life event, but as a debilitating liability. They pushed me out subtly at first, then more overtly with thinly veiled suggestions that I'd never succeed in this demanding world if I had a child tying me down. But they were wrong, so profoundly, catastrophically wrong. 10 long, arduous, transformative years later, I returned to the gleaming headquarters of Innovatech Solutions, not as a supplicant employee hat in hand, but as the owner. And my return wasn't just a strategic business acquisition. It was my quiet, meticulously planned, and exquisitely executed revenge. My name is Martha Evans. In my late 20s, I was what you'd call a rising star, or at least I desperately hoped to be. After graduating top of my class with a degree in business administration, I had thrown myself headfirst into the corporate world, determined to carve out a successful career, to prove to myself, and perhaps to a world that often underestimated ambitious women, that I could achieve anything I set my mind to without relying on anyone but my own tenacity and intellect. My work ethic was relentless. Late nights were the norm, weekends often sacrificed for looming deadlines, or a chance to go the extra mile on a project. I wasn't just doing my job. I was living it, breathing it, constantly striving to learn to innovate, to impress. Innovatech Solutions was at the time a mid-sized but rapidly growing tech firm, a place brimming with potential. When I landed the role of assistant marketing manager there after a grueling series of interviews, I felt an immense sense of pride and accomplishment. This was it. This was the place where I could truly make my mark, where my dedication would be recognized, where I could build a stable, prosperous future. And for the first few years, it seemed my hopes were being realized. I thrived in the fast-paced environment. My ideas were often well received, my projects successful. I earned promotions, moving steadily up the ladder. My direct superior, Greg Thompson, the vice president of marketing, was a man I initially respected. He was demanding, yes, a stickler for detail, but he also seemed to recognize talent, or so I believed. I worked diligently under his supervision, often anticipating his needs, exceeding his expectations, all in the hope of earning his continued approval and securing my path to senior management. I was single-mindedly focused on my career trajectory. Love and family I'd told myself could wait. Then, unexpectedly, wonderfully, I met Michael. He was kind, supportive, and saw the ambitious woman in me not as a threat, but as an inspiration. We fell deeply in love, married, and a year later, the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test changed everything. A wave of elation so pure and overwhelming washed over me. I was going to be a mother. We were going to have a child. Noah. The name echoed in my heart with a profound sense of joy. But beneath the euphoria, a tiny seed of anxiety began to sprout. How would this news be received at Innovatech? At that time, the company culture, while outwardly progressive, still had an undercurrent of old-school corporate mentality. Long hours were not just expected, but lionized. Family commitments were often seen, if unspokenly, as a distraction, a sign of lesser dedication. I tried to push these worries aside. Surely, in this day and age, a pregnancy wouldn't be a professional death sentence. Surely, Greg, who had praised my dedication so many times, would be supportive. I decided to wait until after my first trimester, until the pregnancy was more established, before officially informing Greg. When the day came, I walked into his large, imposing office with a mixture of excitement and a nervousness I couldn't quite shake. He was on a call, waving me in impatiently. When he finally hung up, he looked at me, a pen tapping rhythmically on his polished desk. "Yes, Martha." "What is it? I'm rather busy." "Greg." I began, a smile playing on my lips. "I have some wonderful personal news I wanted to share with you. Michael and we're expecting a baby." The reaction was not what I had naively anticipated. There was no smile, no word of congratulations, no polite inquiry about my due date. Instead, his expression, which had been merely impatient, hardened into something unreadable, then shifted into a look of distinct, almost palpable annoyance. The pen stopped tapping. A heavy silence descended, stretching for an uncomfortably long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of any warmth, flat and cool. "A baby, Martha. Well, that's unexpected." He leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And how exactly do you envision this development fitting in with your responsibilities here? The senior marketing manager role you've been angling for, the one that requires extensive travel, evening client dinners, absolute undivided commitment. Motherhood, as I understand it, is rather time-consuming." I felt a cold dread begin to creep up my spine, my earlier joy evaporating like mist in a harsh wind. "Greg, I assure you I am fully committed to my career," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, professional. "Millions of women successfully balance motherhood and demanding careers. I'm confident I can manage both. I was hoping for your support." He cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Support, Martha. This isn't about support. This is about business realities. Innovatech is in a critical growth phase. We need all hands on deck, 110% dedication. A new mother with all the distractions that entails simply cannot provide that level of commitment. It's not personal, it's practical." Over the next few weeks, his words proved to be a chilling prophecy. The practicalities he spoke of began to manifest in insidious ways. Crucial meetings were scheduled without my knowledge. Key projects I had been leading were subtly reassigned to junior colleagues with the excuse that they needed to lighten my load in anticipation of my upcoming situation. My input, once actively sought, was now often overlooked. The promising path to senior marketing manager, which had seemed so clearly within my grasp, suddenly vanished, the position quietly filled by an external candidate, a man with less experience but crucially no impending parental responsibilities. The final blow came about a month later. Greg called me into his office again. This time his demeanor was even colder, more detached. "Martha," he said, not even bothering to make eye contact, shuffling papers on his desk. "We've been reviewing departmental needs, and in light of your changing personal circumstances, we feel it's best for both you and the company if we make some adjustments. We're offering you a generous severance package conditional on you signing a non-disclosure agreement, of course. Consider it an opportunity to focus on your new priorities." He was firing me, pushing me out, because I was pregnant. "You can't do this, Greg," I stammered, a mixture of disbelief and outrage choking me. "This is discrimination. It's illegal." He finally looked up, then his eyes like chips of ice. "Discrimination, Martha? Don't be naive. We're simply restructuring. Your performance, while adequate in the past, hasn't quite met the evolving needs of the department recently. And frankly, your impending maternity leave would create an untenable disruption. It's a business decision. Nothing more." He slid the severance papers across the desk. "You have until the end of the week to sign, or we can part ways on less amicable terms." I felt a wave of humiliation so profound it almost buckled my knees. My years of loyalty, of back-breaking work, of exceeding expectations, all reduced to an untenable disruption. My joy at becoming a mother twisted into a professional liability. I was being told in no uncertain terms that I couldn't be both a dedicated professional and a devoted mother, that I had to choose, and they had already made the choice for me. I refused to sign the NDA immediately. I consulted a lawyer who confirmed what I already knew: I had a strong case for pregnancy discrimination, but she also warned me of the brutal reality. Such cases were notoriously difficult to prove, emotionally draining, financially crippling, and could drag on for years, potentially blacklisting me within the industry. And all this while I was preparing to welcome my first child into the world. With an incredibly heavy heart, a heart filled with a toxic brew of rage, sorrow, and a burning sense of injustice, I made the pragmatic, agonizing decision. I signed the papers, took the severance, and walked out of Innovatech Solutions, the company I had once loved, the career I had poured my life into, feeling like a failure, a pariah. They had pushed me out, and they had made it abundantly clear in their world a woman with a child would never truly succeed. But as I drove away from that gleaming office building for the last time, a tiny, resilient ember of defiance began to glow amidst the ashes of my shattered dreams. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had silenced me. They were wrong. This wasn't just an ending. It was, I vowed, the beginning of a very different kind of story. My story. And one day I would prove every single one of their callous, discriminatory assumptions utterly, devastatingly wrong. The next few years were a relentless, exhausting blur. After being unceremoniously pushed out of Innovatech, my carefully constructed career path obliterated, I had to start from scratch. The severance package, while seemingly generous, dwindled quickly with the impending arrival of Noah and the sudden loss of a stable income. The initial months were a maelstrom of morning sickness job hunting, while visibly pregnant, a truly demoralizing experience, and the ever-present gnawing fear of an uncertain future. But my primary reason for not succumbing to despair, for not allowing their cynical predictions to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, was the tiny life growing inside me, Noah. His impending arrival was not a liability. It was my anchor, my motivation, my fierce, undeniable reason to fight. I refused to let him grow up in a world where his mother was defined by her limitations rather than her strengths. I refused to let him see me as a victim. The career I realized with a startling clarity wasn't everything. But if I wanted to change this deeply flawed, often misogynistic world, even in my own small way, I had to first prove to myself and then to everyone else that a woman, a mother, could not only succeed, but could redefine the very terms of that success. Life after Innovatech was a harsh readjustment. I eventually found a contract position at a smaller, less prestigious marketing firm. The pay was significantly lower, the opportunities for advancement almost non-existent. But it was a job. It put food on the table. It allowed me to care for Noah, who arrived a few months later, a perfect, beautiful, demanding little miracle who instantly owned every beat of my heart. Juggling the demands of a newborn with the pressures of a new job, often with little sleep and even less support. Michael, my husband, while loving, had his own demanding career, was the hardest thing I had ever done. There were days I felt like I was drowning. Days when Greg Thompson's smug, dismissive face would flash in my mind, his damning words echoing, "You'll never succeed." But those very words meant to crush me, paradoxically became my fuel. I never forgot the sting of that injustice, the casual cruelty of his pronouncement, the complicit silence of the company that had allowed it to happen. That sense of being unfairly treated, of being underestimated solely because I chose to embrace motherhood, became a tenacious, burning ember deep within me. It wasn't a thirst for petty revenge. Not then. It was a deeper, more profound desire for vindication, for justice, not just for myself, but for all the women who had been or would be similarly dismissed. During Noah's nap times late at night, after he was finally asleep in stolen moments between feedings and deadlines, I began to plan. Slowly, quietly, meticulously, I started to lay the groundwork for my own silent revolution. I devoured books on entrepreneurship, on business strategy, on financial management. I took online courses to update my skills, to learn new technologies. I started freelancing on the side, taking on small marketing projects for local businesses, honing my craft, building a portfolio, and crucially establishing a network of contacts entirely independent of my past corporate life. The initial years were incredibly difficult. There were countless setbacks, clients who didn't pay on time, projects that failed. Moments of profound self-doubt when I felt utterly overwhelmed, when the sheer audacity of what I was trying to achieve, to build a successful business from the ground up while raising a child as a virtual single mother, seemed like an impossible dream. I remember many nights crying silently into my pillow, the weight of exhaustion and responsibility almost too much to bear. But then I would look at Noah's sleeping face, his innocent trust in me, and the fire would reignite. I was doing this for him to build a future where he would never see his mother as anything less than strong, capable, and resilient. The derogatory words of Greg Thompson and the complicit executives at Innovatech about how a mother couldn't possibly succeed in a high-powered career became my unlikely mantra, my perverse source of motivation. Every time I faced a daunting challenge, every time a potential investor dismissed my business plan because I was a mompreneur, every time a competitor tried to undercut me, I would hear Greg's voice in my head, and it would spur me on with a renewed, ferocious determination. I would show them. I would show them all. My freelance work gradually grew. My reputation for delivering exceptional results, for innovative thinking, for unwavering professionalism began to spread. I reinvested every penny I earned back into my nascent business, slowly building my team, carefully selecting individuals who shared my vision and my work ethic, many of them talented women who had also faced their own barriers in the traditional corporate world. We were a lean, hungry, and incredibly dedicated team. My future plans began to crystallize. It wasn't just about building a successful marketing agency anymore. It was about creating something more. Something that would fundamentally challenge the outdated discriminatory norms I had experienced. And in the deepest, most secret part of my heart, a new, audacious goal began to take root one day. Somehow, I would not just surpass Innovatech Solutions. I would in some way hold them accountable for what they had done to me, for what they represented. The thought was a distant, almost fantastical one at first, but it never entirely faded. It was the ultimate long-game objective. My personal and professional lives were intertwined, each fueling the other. I was building not just a career, but a legacy of resilience and a platform from which I could eventually change not just my own life, but potentially the lives of many other women who had been unjustly sidelined. The ascent of Phoenix Marketing, the company I had poured my soul into building from the ashes of my corporate career, was neither swift nor easy, but it was steady, fueled by an unyielding determination and an almost fanatical commitment to excellence. Over the next 7 years after those initial brutal years of struggle, Phoenix Marketing grew from a one-woman freelance operation run from my cramped spare bedroom into a thriving, respected, and highly innovative digital marketing agency. We carved out a niche for ourselves by focusing on cutting-edge strategies, by being more agile and client-focused than our larger, more bureaucratic competitors. We won awards. We attracted high-profile clients. My name, Martha Evans, once dismissed and discarded by Innovatech, began to be spoken with respect, even admiration within the industry. I became a visible advocate for working mothers, for pay equity, for flexible work arrangements that allowed talent to flourish regardless of parental status. Phoenix Marketing became a model for this, a place where women and men could build successful careers without having to sacrifice their families, a stark contrast to the rigid, unforgiving culture I had experienced at Innovatech. My personal success was deeply intertwined with this mission. Every milestone Phoenix achieved felt like a small, satisfying vindication, a quiet rebuttal to Greg Thompson's cynical pronouncements. Throughout these years of intense growth and personal transformation, I never entirely lost sight of Innovatech Solutions. I kept a discreet professional eye on their progress, or rather their lack thereof. Through industry news, through former colleagues who occasionally reached out, I learned that the company I had been forced to leave was not faring well. After an initial period of moderate success following my departure built, I suspected on some of the foundational strategies I had helped implement Innovatech began to stagnate. Greg Thompson's leadership, it turned out, was more bluster than brilliance. He was resistant to change, slow to adapt to evolving market trends, and had fostered a culture that, while demanding loyalty, stifled genuine innovation. Key talent began to leave. Client satisfaction scores reportedly dropped. Their stock price, once a source of pride, began a slow, steady decline. And then, almost exactly 10 years after I had walked out of their offices pregnant and humiliated the opportunity I had subconsciously been preparing for, the one that had been a distant, audacious dream began to materialize. News filtered through the financial press. Innovatech Solutions was in serious financial trouble. They were over-leveraged, had lost several major clients, and were actively seeking a buyer or a significant infusion of capital to avoid bankruptcy. My heart did a strange, complicated leap. It wasn't just schadenfreude, though. I confess a small human part of me felt a grim satisfaction. It was more than that. It was the sudden, electrifying realization that my long-held, almost fantastical goal might actually be within reach. I immediately tasked my CFO, a brilliant woman named Sarah Chin, no relation to the reporter from a previous different life story, but an equally formidable ally with a deep dive into Innovatech's financials. The reports she came back with confirmed the rumors and then some. The company was a mess, its balance sheet a disaster, its morale at rock bottom. But beneath the layers of mismanagement and decay, the core technology, some of the patents they held, still had intrinsic value. And their client list, though eroded, still contained some potentially salvageable high-value accounts. It was a high-risk proposition, but the potential reward, on multiple levels, was immense. This wasn't just about acquiring a struggling competitor. This was personal. This was about rewriting a painful chapter of my past. This was about proving in the most undeniable way possible that they had made a catastrophic mistake 10 years ago. I began to assemble a plan, a meticulous, multi-pronged strategy. I engaged with my board at Phoenix Marketing, outlining the strategic rationale, the potential synergies, the market consolidation, the acquisition of valuable intellectual property. They were initially skeptical, understandably wary of taking on such a distressed asset. But as I laid out my vision, not just for the financial turnaround, but for the cultural transformation of Innovatech, for the powerful statement it would make, they began to see the potential. I also started working quietly with a team of investment bankers and legal experts, specialists in mergers and acquisitions. We analyzed Innovatech's debt structure, its shareholder composition, its vulnerabilities. The process was complex, requiring absolute discretion and nerves of steel. There were moments when it seemed impossible, when the financial risks felt too great. But every time doubt crept in, I would remember Greg Thompson's cold, dismissive eyes, his pronouncement that a mother could never succeed. And my resolve would harden anew. The feeling of returning to Innovatech's orbit, not as a supplicant or a victim, but as a potential acquirer, a woman of power and means, was indescribable. It wasn't just about buying a company, it was about reclaiming a part of myself they had tried to extinguish. It was about demonstrating on the grandest possible scale that the very qualities they had deemed liabilities, my impending motherhood, which had since blossomed into the experience of raising a wonderful, intelligent son, Noah, now a bright 10-year-old, had in fact fueled my strength, my resilience, my empathy, and my ultimate success. They had tried to break a woman. They had instead forged a titan. The negotiations for the acquisition of Innovatech Solutions were protracted, complex, and at times deeply acrimonious. Their board, a collection of mostly older men who had presided over the company's decline, were initially dismissive, even contemptuous of an offer coming from a company founded and led by a woman, especially a woman they vaguely remembered as a junior-level employee they had let go years ago. The irony was apparently lost on them, or perhaps it pricked their pride too sharply. Greg Thompson was by this point no longer the VP of marketing. After a series of strategic blunders and declining results, he had been demoted to a less significant special projects director role, a title that barely masked his fall from grace. However, he was still a shareholder, albeit a minor one, and his bitter, resentful voice occasionally echoed in the background of the negotiations, trying to poison the well, to paint Phoenix Marketing as an upstart incapable of managing a company of Innovatech's former stature. His attempts were largely ignored. The dire financial reality of Innovatech spoke louder than his faded influence. My team and I remained steadfast, our offer fair but firm, predicated on a realistic valuation of Innovatech's distressed assets and its potential for turnaround under new dynamic leadership. We had done our homework. We knew their pressure points, their lack of viable alternatives. After several tense rounds of back and forth after they had exhausted all other avenues, they finally grudgingly accepted our bid. Phoenix Marketing, my company, the company I had built from nothing, was now the official owner of Innovatech Solutions. The day the deal was finalized, the day I signed the papers that legally transferred ownership, was a day I will never forget. There was no triumphant fist pump, no outward display of victory. Instead, there was a quiet, profound sense of destiny fulfilled, of a long, arduous circle finally justly closing. My first official act as the new owner and incoming CEO of Innovatech was to schedule an all-hands meeting. I wanted to address the employees directly, to lay out my vision, to quell their anxieties, and to set a new tone from the very top. Walking through the familiar halls of the Innovatech building that morning, no longer as a dismissed employee but as its new leader, was a surreal experience. The building itself hadn't changed much physically, but it felt different, charged with a new energy, a new potential. The muted, almost funereal atmosphere that had reportedly pervaded the company in its declining years was already beginning to lift, replaced by a palpable buzz of curiosity, and I hoped a cautious optimism. As I made my way to the main auditorium, I saw faces I recognized from a decade ago, colleagues who had been junior, then now in mid-level positions. Some looked at me with surprise, others with a dawning recognition, a few with an unreadable expression. And then, near the entrance to the auditorium, I saw him, Greg Thompson. He looked older, grayer, the arrogance that had once defined him now replaced by a look of weary resignation and something else. A flicker of what might have been apprehension, or perhaps a dawning, horrified understanding of the monumental misjudgment he had made 10 years prior. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I offered a polite, neutral nod. He looked away quickly. I stepped onto the stage in the packed auditorium. A hush fell over the room. I took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of faces, anxious, hopeful, skeptical, and began to speak. Good morning, everyone. My name is Martha Evans, and as of today, I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Innovatech Solutions under the ownership of Phoenix Marketing. A low murmur went through the crowd. I know many of you are feeling uncertain about the future. I continued, my voice calm, clear, and confident. Change can be unsettling. But I am not here to dismantle Innovatech. I am here to rebuild it, to revitalize it, to restore it to its former glory, and then to take it to new, unprecedented heights. I spoke of my vision for the company, of innovation, of client focus, of empowering employees. And then I addressed the elephant in the room, the unspoken history that connected me to this place. Some of you may know that I worked here at Innovatech many years ago, early in my career. I learned a great deal during that time. I also learned some hard lessons. Lessons about corporate culture, about leadership, and about the kind of company I never wanted to work for or lead. I paused, letting my words sink in. I could see Greg Thompson in the third row, his face pale, his gaze fixed on the floor. One of those hard lessons, I continued. My voice steady, my gaze sweeping the room, was the deeply flawed and frankly discriminatory belief that a woman cannot be both a committed professional and a dedicated parent. 10 years ago, when I was pregnant with my son, I was told in no uncertain terms that my impending motherhood was a liability, that I would have to choose between my career and my child. I was effectively pushed out of this company because of that belief. A stunned silence filled the auditorium. You could have heard a pin drop. I am standing before you today not just as your new CEO, but as living proof that that belief is a lie. A damaging, anachronistic, and utterly unacceptable lie. My son is now 10 years old. He is the light of my life, and my journey as a mother has not hindered my professional success. It has in fact profoundly enriched it. It has taught me resilience, empathy, multitasking skills beyond measure, and a fierce determination to build a better, more equitable world, starting right here within these walls. Under my leadership, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction, Innovatech Solutions will become a company where talent is the only currency that matters, where diversity is not just a buzzword, but a strategic imperative, where parents are supported, not penalized, where every single employee feels valued, respected, and empowered to bring their whole selves to work. The old ways of thinking, the discriminatory practices, the glass ceilings, they end today. My presence here in this role is a testament to the fact that a woman's career, a parent's career, should not and will not be limited by anyone's outdated prejudices. The changes I initiated at Innovatech were sweeping and immediate. The first and most symbolic was the complete overhaul of parental leave policies, making them among the most generous and supportive in the industry for both mothers and fathers. I mandated unconscious bias training for all hiring managers and leadership. I established clear, transparent pathways for promotion based solely on merit and contribution, not on outdated notions of face time or gendered expectations. We invested heavily in creating a flexible, family-friendly work environment with options for remote work, flexible hours, and on-site childcare support where feasible. The company culture began to transform slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Employees who had long felt stifled or undervalued began to breathe again. Innovation sparked. Collaboration flourished. The exodus of talent reversed. We started attracting top-tier professionals drawn by our revitalized mission and our genuinely inclusive culture. The employees who remained from the old guard either adapted and embraced the new way of working, or they quietly and sometimes not so quietly found themselves incompatible with the new Innovatech and moved on. Greg Thompson was among the latter. A few weeks after my address, he submitted his resignation. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public shaming. His era was simply over. His brand of leadership built on fear and exclusion had no place in the company I was building. His departure was a quiet acknowledgement of his obsolescence. My position at Innovatech wasn't just about leadership. It was about being a role model. I made it a point to be visible, accessible, to mentor young women within the company, to share my story, to encourage them to dream big, and to never let anyone tell them what they couldn't achieve. I wanted them to see that it was possible to have a thriving career and a fulfilling family life, that the two were not mutually exclusive. I taught my own son Noah, now a bright, observant preteen, not just through words, but through my actions, about resilience, about the importance of standing up against injustice, about the true meaning of success. Not just financial amount, but the positive impact you can have on the lives of others. The ultimate sweet revenge wasn't about gloating over Greg Thompson's downfall or a hostile takeover filled with malice. It was far more profound, far more satisfying than that. About a year into my tenure as CEO, Innovatech hosted a major industry conference. Greg Thompson, now a consultant, a common euphemism for unemployed executives of his generation, was in attendance, a guest of another smaller firm. During a networking reception, we found ourselves by chance near the same refreshment table. He looked older, smaller somehow, the bluster gone, replaced by an awkward, almost sheepish demeanor. He mumbled a hesitant, "Martha, congratulations on all of this. The company looks different. Good different." I smiled, a genuine, composed smile. "Thank you, Greg. We're very proud of the progress we're making. We're building a company where everyone has the opportunity to succeed based on their talent and dedication, regardless of their personal circumstances." There was no malice in my voice, no lingering bitterness. Just the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had faced down injustice and emerged not just victorious, but transformed. He knew what I meant. The unspoken truth of his past actions, his colossal misjudgment, hung heavy in the air between us. He couldn't meet my eye for more than a second. He nodded curtly, grabbed a canapé, and quickly melted back into the crowd. That, I realized, was the most potent form of accountability. The silent, undeniable evidence of his profound error reflected in the thriving, equitable company I now led. His shame, his irrelevance, was his own private reckoning. My true revenge was in the success of Innovatech under my leadership. It was in the thriving careers of the women, the mothers, the fathers who now felt supported and valued. It was in the innovative products we launched, the new markets we conquered. It was in the culture of respect and inclusivity we had painstakingly built. I had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that mothers are not liabilities. They are assets. They bring unique strengths, resilience, and a depth of experience that can enrich any organization. I stood on the pinnacle of my career, not just because of my personal success, but because of the positive, lasting changes I had helped to create not only for myself and my son, but for countless other women who would follow. My story, once a painful testament to discrimination, had become a beacon of hope, a powerful lesson in resilience, courage, and the unwavering, world-changing power of a mother who refused to be broken.